Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Have a Conversation podcast, where we aim to promote education and raise awareness on the two federal educational laws, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act and the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is also known as ESSA. I am Elizabeth Fortner. I am the Marketing and Outreach Specialist for the Education for Children and Youth Experiencing Homelessness program in Region 3, or as we like to say, heck yeah. So, for those who do not know, June is the LGBTQ Pride Month, and it honors the 1969 Stonewall Uprising in Manhattan, which was a turning point for the gay liberation movement in the United States. And the first Pride March, it was in New York City, and that was held on June 28th, 1970, which was the first anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. And the march's theme was gay pride because although gay power had been proposed, it was argued that the movement was not yet politically empowered, but that its members felt pride in their sexual identity. And research has shown that those who identify as LGBTQ plus have 120% higher risk of experiencing some form of homelessness. And so youth who identify as LGBTQ plus disproportionately experience homelessness. And they are also at high risk for family rejection, physical assaults, and sexual exploitation in shelters and on the streets. So for this episode, we're going to talk about youth homelessness and the relation with LGBTQ plus community and how that intertwines with one another. And so with us today from the Rainbow Rose Center in York, PA, we have Tay Chase, who is the office manager for the Rainbow Rose Center. So thank you so much, Tay. Welcome to our podcast. I am so glad that we were able to connect and have you join us on the podcast to talk a little bit more in depth of youth homelessness and the LGBTQ plus community. And just to kind of begin our conversation, would you mind just sharing a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah. First, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Like you said, I'm Tay. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm from central Pennsylvania, where the Rainbow Rose Center is located. I'm technically the county, but I just moved to this county. I'm very excited to be able to give back to a community that I love so much. So I grew up in and around the LGBTQ plus community. My mom came out when I was 4, and so I've been going to Pride since about that age, and to different things. And long before I identified as queer myself. And I'm really passionate about things that impact my community, and I want to empower those around me. So, my professional journey has taken me lots of different places. So, I've done health education, politics, transgender healthcare, community organizing, and just throughout all of that, I've held my love of community deeply, and that is what keeps me going. And as the office manager of the Rainbow Rose Center, I'm just really passionate about creating inclusive and empowering spaces for everyone.
Yes. Well, thank you. Oh, I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
I do like that you shared the pronouns with you or with us and the audience, because I do want to kind of get into that of the importance of why individuals identify with those pronouns and why do those pronouns, have that sentimental, feeling.
Well, it's similar to how so I identify as non-binary,
Okay.
but it's you can even think about a cisgender person who identifies as the sex they were assigned at birth, where if you start calling them pronouns that don't match with what they use, it just creates a little cognitive dissonance in their head. It feels weird, and that's just how it feels for me. I realize that she, her pronouns just made me feel not myself. They didn't feel reflective of who I was. And I realized they, them pronouns really for me, it's more of a neutral thing, but for some people it clicks. It's really positive. They feel really good about themselves. And I do too.
Yeah.
Um, for me, it's more just what feels correct for myself. For some people, it's can have a bunch of different meanings. And really, with all LGBTQ plus identities, it has a big personal aspect and is just can vary person to person. So
Right.
my experience as non-binary might not translate to someone else's, but
Hmm.
for me, it's just about what feels right, what feels neutral and good, and to be misgendered, to be called different pronouns that aren't the ones that I use. It just feels like a level of respect when someone uses them, when someone who knows that I use them uses them.
Yeah.
But if someone knows I use they, them pronouns and they're using she, her, or another set of pronouns, it feels as if they're not respecting me and who I am.
Do you feel like that triggers individuals when they're
It
not
can,
called? Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I don't have exact statistics on this, but I do know that just using correct pronouns has been shown to be life-saving. It reduces suicidal thoughts and actions, and it keeps people from experiencing as much dysphoria as other things might give them. It's safety, it's comfort, it's respect.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I told you this when we met a few weeks ago that I am guilty of, not really acknowledging, and it's not that I do it on purpose. Okay.
Mhm.
It's kind of like I'm so used to like that routine of if I'm talking to a group of women, I usually say, thank you, ladies. Or
Mhm.
in a group of mixed, I say, thanks, guys. And
Mhm.
I'm starting to realize now that I need to change that because maybe there's someone in that group who may not identify as a
Mhm.
man or a woman. And I have to, be more cognizant of that. However, I know there are individuals who they're they're not going to take it, too hard if you accidentally
Mhm.
say, you know, thanks, girlfriend or something, and they
Yeah.
identify as a they them. But I do know that for some, it can really trigger them and make them feel like, okay, I'm not being heard. You're obviously not seeing that I just said that I identify as a non-binary or whatever pronoun they do. So I can see why that's
Mhm.
truly important. And I need to be more mindful of that too.
I mean, I even mess up. I'm non-binary. My last partner was non-binary. I misgender myself. I misgender my friends, but I catch myself and I
Yeah.
fix it immediately. And I don't
Yeah.
make there's a couple things. It's when it's malicious and purposeful misgendering
Mm.
versus like someone just messes up or slips up. Call my cats the wrong name. I see it as similar to that sometimes for me personally. For others, it is way different. For
I'm
me
sure.
personally, I see it as just a slip up as long as no one's doing it maliciously or purposefully or out of a lack of caring. But there is a difference when people just aren't trying, or it can also, one thing I think of is like when you catch yourself, allies will often overcorrect or over apologize, which it also isn't necessary. I mean, people make mistakes. We're all human. You don't have to bend over backwards to apologize. As long as you acknowledge what you did and correct yourself, that's usually all that's needed. But
Mhm.
it is important to check in with the person that you're talking to.
Absolutely.
Super
And now I notice a lot of meetings that I attend, sometimes they'll go around the room and say,
important.
okay, let's introduce yourselves and also what are your pronouns? And I thought that was actually beneficial because there was actually some people in the room who I would never have thought would have identified as something other than what I saw on the outside.
Yeah, and I
So I'm glad
recognize,
they did that because then I would have, maybe accidentally called them the wrong gender. And then that would have made them upset.
yeah, like I recognize that I'm very feminine presenting, even though I don't identify with any genders.
Hmm.
I still recognize that I present a certain way. I don't plan on changing that certain way. my presentation doesn't have to do with my intrinsic feelings of relation to gender, but I recognize I still read as cisgender. I read as a woman. Um, so I do get lumped in the groups of thanks ladies or
Yeah.
girlfriend, which isn't always, sometimes when it's from certain people and it's said as slang, that's one thing, but it's really again about the individual and their comfort level. Like a friendly like, hey you guys, can seem totally innocent and non-gendered, but to a certain person, maybe like a trans femme, someone who was assigned male at birth but is transitioning or just identifies as more feminine, that can be disorienting and dysphoric.
Hmm.
um but yeah, just I really like that there's a trend of going to setting the precedent of introducing yourself and your pronouns, because it's a lot to be the only person in the room who is identifying yourself by your pronouns. You have to choose to either be misgendered or not unnecessarily, but out yourself as different than the norm because you are the only one giving that.
Hmm.
Um, so giving your pronouns, putting it in your email bio, introducing yourself with them is just a great way to normalize it and make it easier for trans and non-binary and other gender non-conforming folks to step forward and share theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm starting to see that in the emails now. A lot of people are putting that in their signature. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing that because I think pronouns are very important and it's up and coming
Mhm.
and it's, being talked about a little bit more and that we have to raise that awareness because like you said, we don't want to cause anyone, some mental health issues or some suicidal thoughts, like you said. If we can prevent that just by calling them what they wish to be called, then that's
Mhm.
not that's not that hard. Um,
Mhm.
so Tay, we talked a little bit about Pride Month. I kind of gave a little history lesson there, which actually I never knew that until I did some research on Pride Month. But are you doing anything for like do you celebrate Pride Month or
I do. I
do
love
you?
Pride.
Okay, what do you
I've
do?
been, like I said earlier, I've been going to Pride Festival since I was young. I grew up in Lancaster County. There has been, I think it was either the 14th or 16th annual Pride Festival. And I'm a theater kid. So unless I was in a show when I was younger or I was completely out of the state, I have never missed a Lancaster Pride. I've been to different ones. I've never been to one of the really big ones like Philly or DC. I would love to,
Or New
but
York City?
yes, exactly. But we're in York County right now. York County Pride is happening this weekend, so that's very exciting.
Ooh.
I know Lidditz in Lancaster County is having one the weekend after on the 29th. Central PA has another one in July in Harrisburg. There are so many things to do. There's so many events that aren't Pride festivals as well. I went to a drag show earlier this month. I'm going to a happy hour tomorrow. There's so many opportunities to come together with similar people who you share community with
Yeah.
and just get to be yourself and connect. And it's just really fun. And it's not just rainbows and sparkles. It is sometimes. I love wearing rainbow clothing and usually my hair is bright pink or bright blue or something. I haven't done it in a couple months, but it's fun to just be colorful, but that's not reflective of necessarily everyone in the community. But
Right.
it's still a time to come together, honor our past, celebrate where we are, and have hope for the future.
Nice. And what can those people do during this month to raise awareness for the importance of Pride Month?
Well, I think one great thing people can do to just raise awareness in general, whether it's Pride Month or not, is just plugging into organizations near you, especially the ones near you, but there are also regional, state, national organizations that are amazing. But plugging into your local community, helping amplify the voices that are already doing the work. If you
Mhm.
want to do the work too, see about volunteering, getting involved, but really just amplifying what is being done and spreading the word and having those hard conversations with the people around you.
Yes, having the conversations. Those are always not the most easiest thing to do, but it needs to be done and needs to be had. Uh, So I want to get into a little bit on the LGBTQIA plus. See, I got it this time.
That's how our org uses it. I
Yeah,
will go back and forth between a bunch of them, but we just want to be like as inclusive of different identities as possible.
absolutely,
I love the
absolutely.
plus. No matter what, I always use the
Yes,
plus.
because that means, there could be more and more and more, but so we're just going to put a plus there. But with that in youth, and the one question that comes up for me because, with our EQIA program, we focus on the educational stability for children
Mhm,
who are experiencing homelessness.
mhm,
And with statistics showing that some of these youth who are experiencing homelessness identify in the
mhm.
LGBTQIA plus. So the question is more of your family acceptance. So if you don't mind, Tay, and if this is too personal, we don't need to discuss it, but would you like to share how you came out with your family? And how
Yeah,
was
so
that for you?
I thought about whether I wanted to share this because I did not really run into barriers with my coming out. But I mean, we deserve to hear positive queer stories too, even while we're honoring the sadder and more serious and somber ones, because those
Absolutely.
exist and are important. But so is queer joy. And so, like I said earlier, my mom's gay. She came out when I was 4. I came out at 18 as bisexual, 22, 23 as non binary. So there was about 14 years that my family had time to acclimate to LGBTQIA identities and things like that. It paved the way for me to be able to come out. And some of my cousins are also LGBTQIA and out. So it's been a process. It was a process at first, I am sure,
Mm.
to learn and unlearn. But I'm very grateful and privileged to have a really understanding and accepting family, or at least ones that don't cause issues or say anything. Not everyone gets the gender. Even my mom, I love her dearly. We love my mom. She doesn't always get the gender. I mean, it's the thing. And it's hard to grasp for a lot of people,
When
but
you say the
I'm at
gender, do you
least,
mean like the pronoun part of it?
um, they don't necessarily understand the identifying outside the gender binary, but
Okay,
it's no judgment or hate. It's just similar to how I'm polyamorous. They just don't always understand that. They
gotcha.
can logically understand it, but it just doesn't completely click as something that they've been through or can relate to. But people struggle with pronouns. That's an open secret for all people, and including in my family, even though they are very understanding and accepting. And they do try, and I really appreciate that.
Well, that's
I recognize not everyone has that though, and
no.
but we can get systems and organizations in place that help support.
So yeah, it can be very challenging for youth and actually for anyone, no matter what
Mhm.
age, to come out and say that and to disclose that information to your family with the fear of, being rejected or being judged or being kicked out, and they can't be their true selves, which I'm sure can increase some mental health issues there
Mhm.
because, they're struggling with, well, who am I? I can't be myself. I have to hide who I am. I'm sure that can stir up a lot of, negative emotions. And if someone, so let's say someone is scared, someone is
Mhm.
afraid to come out because of what repercussions could happen. What
Mhm.
words of encouragement would you offer?
Um, it's it's complicated because I recognize not everyone does have the privilege of being able to come out. Safety is important. Sometimes people do have to prioritize their safety. However, there's at least spaces where you can come and be yourself and say, "This is who I am," and have people understand and accept that. Whatever your level of outness to your family, to your community is, there is a community there where you can come and be yourself. Um, but yeah, every time, I think what I would just say is every time someone comes forward and says, this is who I am proud of that, you cannot change that, and this is just who I am, who I love, who I identify as, however, whatever combination of LGBTQIA plus labels or non-labels they have, it's just every time someone comes forward and says, this is who I am, the world just becomes better, I think, because we have people being true to themselves, being authentic, and being loud about their identity. And I don't think there's really a negative to people being authentically themselves in who they love or are, at least personally. But I do recognize some people don't have the privilege to be able to come out. And it's really about finding the spaces you can be yourself, because community is life-saving.
Mhm.
Community is so, so important. And there are spaces where you can come and be yourself, even when you don't feel comfortable doing that in the world at large.
And what are some of those places? Where are they at? Like, can you name a
So a lot of
few?
places, yeah, a lot of places have local organizations. Like I am part of the Rainbow Rose Center in York County. I am in the physical office right now. We have support group meetings, we have programs, we have events. Um, and there are spaces people can come and escape from their daily stresses and just be. And a lot of organizations do that, whether they are LGBTQIA plus organizations specifically, or they are just like a YWCA that has a youth support group for LGBTQIA individuals or something like that.
Yeah.
There are these groups around. There's also national things for LGBTQIA youth. There's things like Q Space, which is an online chat space for individuals to come and connect with like-minded, like-identitied folks and just
Chat with
come
them.
together and
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. And now, do you feel like the amount of supportive services for youth who are in that situation, do you feel like there's enough of it, or do you feel like there's more we need to do?
There's always
I mean,
more
and
to
there's
be
always more.
done.
Exactly. There's always more to be done.
I would say there are some great organizations doing a lot of great work.
Okay.
There are always going to be gaps in care. We don't have something for everything in every space. So we have organizations that are amazing but might not be able to provide housing, rapid rehousing assistance, which can deal with like your focus of displacement for youth, and like you said, like 120% more likely are LGBTQIA youth to experience housing displacement. Um, so that's a really important service, but not every organization has the privilege and the funds to be able to help with that. So there are gaps, whether it be on a national level or on a local level. There are always going to be gaps to be filled. But there are organizations doing amazing work and at least trying to connect with other resources that are at least open and affirming.
So when you talk about safe space and going somewhere where they can be authentically themselves and have that support from others who may identify the same, did you ever encounter any type of discrimination when you came out, or as you just were growing up and identifying as a they them? Is that how you identify, correct? If I'm not
It
mistaken, or
is. I identify
non-binary?
as non-binary using they them pronouns.
Gotcha.
As of a couple of years ago, when I was younger, I lived in blissful ignorance of my own identity, partially because I just didn't explore it, and partially just because I had been like, I remember fourth or fifth grade, I think it was fifth grade, on one of those like prank sites. Someone made it say that my biggest secret was that I was gay, like my mom's. And so from fifth grade until freshman year of high school, I dealt with a lot of internalized homophobia and a lot of
Mm.
internalized biphobia. Like I said earlier, I had a really privileged coming out experience, but that doesn't mean I wasn't terrified. Especially, not especially, but for me, identifying as bisexual and non binary, I identify in the gray spaces that people, even within the LGBTQIA plus community, might not understand.
Yeah.
I've heard people saying biphobic comments within the queer community just because they don't necessarily understand the being attracted to everyone or more than one gender at the same time. The idea of like needing to pick a side,
Mm-hmm.
which I I have never been able to make a decision generally. I'm not going to start with my identity and who I love because I just like people. But
Right.
I have definitely experienced biphobia even from within the community. It's no secret that there are still problems even within great communities. There are problems. Like there is racism and biphobia and transphobia and misunderstanding and other types of bigotry and, like I said, not understanding
Mm-hmm.
within even the LGBTQIA plus community. There's always learning and unlearning to be done.
Right. Right. Um, did you ever encounter like bullying?
Because I didn't come out until I was in college, I didn't really deal with a lot of what I know our youth goes through. There
Yeah.
is so much bullying, there is so much harassment. We can think of cases like Next Benedict a few months ago, who was a non binary teen who was attacked and beaten nearly to death and did end up dying later from either from their
Injuries.
injuries, from medication they took. It's very unclear, but
Uh,
it was extreme bullying to the point of physical abuse. And it's a tragic, tragic case. And that happens. And it's real and it's a threat. I did not, again, I was very privileged to not go through that. It was just because I did not identify outwardly that way as a youth. I was still kind of young in college, of course. Like 18 is still a young formative time, but I was very lucky to have surrounded myself by very accepting people that
yeah.
by the time I was ready to come out, I had a circle that was supportive of me. Especially having like an LGBTQIA family, I already didn't associate with people I wasn't sure were accepting. So I was very grateful in that sense and
Yeah.
very lucky to have my experience. And I
That's great.
recognize not everyone does that.
And you are in the right place too. Being able to offer that support to others who
Mhm,
may have different experiences as you did or than you did. Because I feel like maybe some youth may not want to come out because of the
mhm.
bullying, and they
Yeah.
rather hold that to themselves than have to be exposed to physical abuse or to
Mhm,
emotional, mental, verbal, which kind of sucks if you ask me, because they should be able to be themselves without having to worry about family rejection or being kicked
mhm,
out or being bullied. And so, just to shift that conversation to addressing the issue with homelessness among the LGBTQ youth, and it is very concerning that the youth who identify are at a higher risk of
mhm,
experiencing that housing instability. So, I kind of want to share, or I want to, understand the reasons behind this. So, I know you did some presentations regarding youth homelessness and the LGBTQ with the Trevor Project. And I know you have a lot of data on you and a lot of statistics. So, if you don't mind, I want to hear those specific statistics and the information about this demographic when it comes to housing instability with our LGBTQ plus.
yeah. About a year or two ago, I did a presentation for my previous job. It pulls a lot from one of the biggest resources I used, like you said, was the Trevor Project. They did a whole research project on this, and they have done lots of needs assessments. For those who aren't aware, the Trevor Project, it works with LGBTQIA plus youth with the specific goal of reducing youth suicide. Um, so they're a great organization, a national one. So as part of my research, I found a lot of things that really disheartened me, but that unfortunately, didn't necessarily surprise me as someone who grew up around the LGBTQIA plus community. In 2022, the Trevor Project had a great report on LGBTQIA youth homelessness or housing instability, displacement. They found that 28% of queer youth have at some point in their lives experienced homelessness or housing instability. And it can be further broken down by different racial categories to see like the, because all of our identities are intersectional. They're intersectional. They all overlap. They all inform each other. And it's no secret that racial identities also have different impacts on lived experiences.
Yeah.
So, along with out of that 28% of queer youth that have experienced displacement, um, out of different groups, so 44% of Native or Indigenous LGBTQIA plus youth have experienced housing instability at some point in their lives, along with 16% of Asian American or Pacific Islander youth, 27% each of white and Latinx individuals, and 26% of Black LGBTQIA youth, and 36% of LGBTQIA youth with a multiracial identity. And it's really important to identify also that trans youth have even higher rates of housing insecurity than their cisgender LGBTQ plus I counterparts and peers. Um, and they have specific needs that also aren't being met. For instance, like gender split shelters that don't take trans identities into account. So the Trevor Project further goes on to state that 29% of trans men, 38% of trans women, and 35% of non-binary youth experience current or past housing instability. So
Wow.
it's a widespread issue, and there's a lot of reasons. So there's no one size fits all approach, but kind of like I was saying, how family support is really important and support of the community around you is really important, and how pronouns can be life saving. Family issues are the biggest factor of housing instability and displacement of LGBTQIA youth. The primary reason for so much housing displacement is family conflict. So, 1 in 4 LGBTQIA plus teens are forced to leave home after coming out, according to Lesley University, either because they were kicked out or they were facing violence and had to run away. The Trevor Project further broke this down, finding that 16% of homeless LGBTQIA plus youth ran away, with 55% of those citing mistreatment due to their identity, and 14% were kicked out, with 40% saying it was directly related to their LGBTQIA plus identity. So family conflict is a big reason for youth houselessness, even outside of the LGBTQIA plus community. But it stacks, it's intersectional, it all goes together. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing those statistics. We always like numbers. Numbers speak volumes when we see it on paper, when we hear about it. And it's also just important to remember that youth who are LGBTQ and are facing homelessness or housing instability are also more likely to experience victimization and ending up in foster care, and also struggle with food insecurity compared to their stably housed LGBTQ plus peers.
I was just gonna say, based on what you just said about the foster care system, I also want to point out that older older youth, so like young adults, people over 18 but still pretty young, are aging out of foster care, and there's no support in place to address their specific needs. So that's another reason for like young adults becoming homeless or displaced, is just there's no support system for them after they've aged out of foster care.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get it personally. I was in the foster care system. So I do know that once you get out, you're kind of like you're out. Thankfully, I had a good support from certain adults in my life that I had trusted, and they were able to guide me in the direction. But yeah, it's life after foster care is definitely not easy. It's so again, I also want to bring it back again to when we were talking about mental health and suicidal thoughts, and just I can imagine what youth go through, and as well as adults. But we're talking about youth homelessness, so I want to stick it to this population, but um, just let's talk a little bit about how, when these youth are getting kicked out of their homes, when they're being rejected from their parents, now they're living on the street, and now they're struggling with, or they're living in a shelter, which again, we just talked about it. Some shelters, they can, undergo some bullying there, depending on how they identify and how people are in the shelter, or, you know, why is it important to make sure that that mental health piece is in place as well? Because I feel like they both kind of overlap. They go hand in hand. I think we need to have a strong mental health support system for our youth experiencing homelessness who also
Mhm.
identify as LGBTQ.
Yeah, because it's like I've been saying, like everything goes together, everything
Yeah.
intersects, it overlaps. So not only is mental health care already really hard to access for displaced youth, but it's also really hard to find affirming care that is affordable, close to you, um, accessible at all. And that's really unfortunate because, according to the Trevor Project, um, youth, LGBTQIA youth experiencing housing displacement are 2 to 4 times as likely to report depression, anxiety, self harm, suicidal
Mhm.
thoughts or actions. And they're really, really disheartening statistics.
Yeah.
Actually, 68% of youth who are currently homeless had self harmed in the past year, compared to 49% who had secure housing. Of course, the second number is still shockingly and disproportionately large and disappointing to see, but you can see that there's a huge discrepancy that housing security brings out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so sad to think. It does break my heart that our young ones, our students who really they should just be focusing on being a kid and going to school and being around their friends, that they're having to deal with coming out, how they identify themselves, having to disclose it to their family, and hopefully they're accepted,
Mhm.
getting kicked out maybe, and now having to find housing on top of it, and then their mental health. It's just like, that's a lot
Yeah,
for a
that'd be
young
a lot
one.
for anybody,
Absolutely.
but
But
especially if we're talking about youth.
I know. And that's why I'm so glad there's places like the Rainbow Rose Center that
Mhm.
provides that safe outlet for these kids to go to, because it is very important. If they can't get that home at home, we should be able to provide some type of safe place for them to know that they're loved.
Like you're saying, home isn't always safe and school isn't always safe.
No.
I was talking about Next Benedict earlier. That happened at school in the bathroom. It made national news and was a huge thing and a huge
Yeah.
discussion point. I know here at the Rainbow Rose Center, I also run the young adult support group, which was formerly, there was a teen group and a young adult group that were just one group. And when that was happening, was that group was meeting around the time of Next Benedict. So I brought in a social worker. We had like a grief processing session. Things like that are really important.
Creating more inclusive workplaces, recreational spaces for our kiddos, schools is an ongoing effort as well. And there's
Mhm.
still, like we said, there's still a long way to go. There's always work to be done. There's always more that we can do.
Absolutely.
But I want to know from you, what are the top 3 changes that you would like to see happen?
Well, there's no one size fits all solution. So it really, because there's so many confounding reasons that someone may be experiencing displacement or housing insecurity, um, like we've mentioned, like poverty, substance abuse, being in foster care, family support. There's so many reasons that someone may be facing displacement. Um, and like you were saying, work and school, we need anti-discrimination protections and anti-bullying policies that we're just not seeing right now. Um, but even aside that, I think the three big ones that I really wanted to highlight were focusing on family intervention and reunification. So if a lot of these people are facing houselessness because they don't have supportive homes, but they have homes they could go to, they're just not supportive or safe, they might be dangerous. So we need to focus on mediation, early intervention, support systems for families that are navigating this. And there are support groups like at LGBTQIA centers. There's organizations that have local chapters like PFLAG that are great for families as a whole to learn and process and all of that. Along with family intervention and reunification, there's also improved crisis response and housing programs. With how inaccessible mental health care can be, housing programs can be, it's really important to have support there for navigating these, but also for when things, for lack of a better term, hit the fan and you just need crisis management.
Yeah.
We need competent crisis management. And the last thing I really want to highlight is that 99%, according to True Colors United, over 99% of service providers have reported working with LGBTQIA youth, but there's not really specific training programs that are broad for this. So we need all providers. If over 99% of service providers are working with LGBTQIA youth, then all service providers need to be competent and trained with comprehensive training. There's tons of unmet needs and no federal programs in place to address these specific needs of LGBTQIA plus individuals. And with training service providers, like I said, there's no one size fits all solution. So we need trained individuals that can help people navigate this step by step.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you. And we all hope we could see that happen. And one thing I do want to commend you for is you say it's not a one size fit all. I love that term because we use the same thing when we talk about experiencing displacement, that homelessness is not a one size fit all. It doesn't look just like what we think it looks like. It can look like so many things. And that's why it's so important to spread awareness. It's important to educate. And it's also important to have conversations. Hence our podcast title, Let's Have a Conversation. So Tay, I do want to thank you so much for joining me on our conversation. The research the research data that you found with the Trevor Project, and also just kind of giving me a little lesson on the pronouns. I do appreciate that and the importance of using them and being more mindful when you're around people. And if they already have disclosed their pronouns, use it. If they haven't, maybe ask and don't just assume. So I do appreciate that. I appreciate your insight. I also appreciate you being willing to share your story and how you came out. I'm so glad that it was a good experience for you. I could only hope that others can have a joyful experience, but I know it's not always the case. But I'm sorry.
Sorry. I was going to say, I forgot to say this earlier, but even though I had a really privileged and accepting family and a really privileged coming out experience, I was still terrified. Coming out is terrifying. I didn't even do it directly to my mom. I did when I came out as non-binary. I told her first, but when I came out as bisexual, I just posted on Facebook and then turned off my phone, basically. I was like, it was coming out day. I'm like, I've been doing this long enough. Let's go public. And
so you were still scared.
I was terrified coming out, being yourself when you're so used to questioning who that is or being uncertain, to stand up and say, this is who I am. It's scary.
It's scary. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you closed it with that one because I was thinking, I'm like, she had a delightful experience. She was good.
They had a delightful experience.
Sorry, they had a delightful, see, I just did it. I just did it.
And that's why it's important to be aware, though, is just because not everyone is comfortable constantly interjecting to correct others because it can be tiring.
Correct me because, like I said, I am still learning and
Yeah.
I am guilty of not acknowledging it. And well, I do acknowledge it. I see it there. It's just sometimes my brain just and forgets. So, but thank you. I appreciate you correcting me. And I also appreciate you saying that you were scared because I'm sure it's scary for anybody to
Yeah.
be themselves, like you said, and then to have to hopefully hope that your loved ones are going to accept you after that. So I
Yeah.
can only imagine.
I won't lie. My immediate family was very accepting. One thing I neglected to mention is because I was so young when it happened, but my grandma's side of the family, very Irish Catholic, very traditional, very not understanding of differences in different people. They stopped inviting us to their family events. They stopped coming to Christmas. We don't fully know why. I have my suspicions. But they stopped inviting. First, it was they wouldn't invite my mom's partner to weddings. Then they stopped inviting my mom and would only invite me, which was weird to a child. And then stopped inviting me even before I came out, just because that was my family.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just impact the people, it impacts those around them
Everyone
too.
by association. Yeah, and that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but thank you, Tay, so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. I'm sorry. I would.
No, thank you for calling me out on that one too. You're like
Yeah,
they.
of course. I just will babble until I am told not to. So
No, that's okay. That's okay. But I do appreciate you being willing to do this podcast and having this conversation with me. And I just want to thank our audience who are listening to another episode of Let's Have a Conversation. And please join us again for our next episode. And I hope you have a great day.